Hey everyone, welcome to this deep dive. You guys requested that we take a deep dive into depression and anxiety, and we thought a great place to start would be Matt Haig's book, Reasons to Stay Alive.
Oh, yeah, it's a really great book.
Have you read it?
I have, yeah. It's been a while, but it's one that really stuck with me.
Yeah, and I think what's so great about it is like the way he weaves his personal story with broader reflections on mental health.
Yeah, you really get a sense of what it's actually like to live with those conditions.
Absolutely. And one of the things that struck me the most was his honesty.
Mm.
Like, he doesn't shy away from the really difficult stuff. He describes his depression as feeling trapped, like he was stuck in a room with no way out.
Yeah, that feeling of being trapped. I hear that a lot from people who've experienced depression.
Yeah,
Like it's more than just feeling sad or down. It's this sense of being completely overwhelmed
right.
and helpless.
And he talks about like being unable to find pleasure even in things he used to enjoy.
Oh, yeah.
Like all the joy had been sucked out of his life.
Yeah. And everything just felt bleak and pointless.
Yeah, anhedonia, that's what that's called.
Right.
That inability to feel pleasure. And it's a big part of depression.
It's a huge part.
Yeah.
And then there's this whole other layer where he talks about like the physical symptoms of his anxiety and panic. Like his heart racing, his breath, catching his thoughts, just spiraling out of control.
Yeah, the mind-body connection is so real.
Right.
It's not just in your head, it affects your whole body.
Totally. He even compares it to being in like a David Cronenberg movie.
Ooh, that's a vivid image.
Super vivid. Which I think just speaks to the intensity of what he was experiencing.
Absolutely.
Now, another key point that Haig makes is that depression can affect anyone. It doesn't discriminate. He talks about how during his breakdown, he felt envious of seemingly normal people.
Right.
Like he was on the outside looking in.
Yeah, like you're watching everyone else living their lives and you're stuck.
And he actually had a panic attack before giving a college presentation
Oh, wow.
on cubism of all things.
Interesting topic for a panic attack.
I know, right?
But it really goes to show you that it can happen to anyone, anywhere.
At any time.
Exactly.
And he actually lists a bunch of famous figures who have battled depression. People
Yeah.
like Abraham Lincoln
Oh, yeah.
and Buzz Aldrin.
Wow, I wouldn't have expected that.
You wouldn't think of those figures as necessarily struggling with mental health,
Right.
which I think really reinforces the point that we never really know what someone else is going through.
It's so true.
Yeah,
We all have our hidden struggles.
absolutely. And this brings us to the whole idea of the importance of talking about mental health.
Yes, destigmatizing it.
Encouraging open conversations so that people don't feel so alone.
Exactly. The more we talk about it, the less shame there is around it.
I think that's such a crucial point. Now, Haig also really emphasizes the role of love in his recovery.
Oh, absolutely.
He talks about his partner, Andrea, as being like a lifesaver. He even says at one point that she has a PhD in this kind of thing because she had become so good at supporting him.
Well, that's beautiful. And it speaks to the power of having a strong support system.
Yeah, he specifically mentions how she helped him navigate daily tasks. Like the really practical things.
Yeah, when even the smallest things can feel overwhelming.
She also encouraged him to seek professional help, and she was patient with him even when he pushed her away.
That's so important, being patient and understanding, because it's not always easy to be around someone who's struggling with depression.
No, it's not. And he's very honest about the fact that their relationship wasn't always smooth sailing.
Right.
They argued they faced challenges, but ultimately their love was this driving force that helped him keep going.
Yeah, love can be such a powerful motivator.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just about romantic gestures. It was about facing those difficult times together, communicating and being there for each other.
Yeah, riding the waves together.
He actually talks about a really intense argument they had while living in Ibiza.
Oh, wow.
It was fueled by his drinking and her frustration with his behavior.
Substance use can definitely complicate things.
It definitely can. But ultimately, they found their way back to each other stronger than before.
That's what matters.
It's a good reminder that relationships aren't about perfection. It's about navigating those ups and downs together.
It's about growth and resilience.
Exactly. And he also highlights how his experience of caring for Andrea when she was going through her own difficulties actually helped him find strength.
Oh, interesting.
Like when her mother was ill, he talks about finding a new sense of purpose and supporting her.
That's so beautiful.
Yeah, it's like sometimes helping others can help us heal ourselves.
It can give you a sense of perspective
Definitely.
and purpose.
Exactly.
It's really interesting how he talks about recovery not being this straight line,
Yeah.
Like you don't just suddenly get better and that's it. He compares it to like a homeopath treating a cold where you might actually feel worse
Right.
before you start to feel better.
It's not a quick fix. It's a
Yeah.
process.
Exactly. And there will be setbacks. There will be days when you feel like you're back to square one.
He's very open about that.
Yeah, and I think that's really important because it can be so discouraging
Mm-hmm.
if you think that recovery should be this perfect upward trajectory.
Right. Like you should be constantly improving.
Yeah, but it's not like that. It's more like a dance.
Yeah.
You take 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
And he talks about how important it is to learn to ride those waves,
Yeah, to accept that the ups and downs are part of the process.
and to not let those difficult moments erase the progress you've made.
Absolutely.
Uh,
Because you are making progress even if it doesn't always feel like it.
he also stresses the importance of becoming aware of your own triggers, the things that can make your symptoms worse.
Oh yeah, self-awareness is crucial.
For him, parties were a big trigger, so he learned to kind of manage his expectations around those situations
Right, like knowing what your triggers are can help you prepare for them.
and to develop coping mechanisms.
Exactly.
Oh.
You can't always avoid your triggers, but you can learn to manage them.
He also talks a lot about the importance of self-care and building a routine that supports your well-being.
Oh yeah, self-care is so important, especially when you're struggling with mental health.
He specifically mentions how exercise was transformative for him, particularly running.
Yeah, there's a lot of research now that shows how beneficial exercise is for both physical and mental health.
It releases endorphins, reduces stress, and can even help you sleep better.
It's like a natural mood booster.
He actually compares running to a trek across the Himalayas.
Wow, it's intense.
I know, right? But it really highlights how challenging it can be.
And yet also how rewarding.
Exactly. He also talks about how books were like treasure maps leading him back to himself.
Oh, I love that.
He found so much comfort and solace in reading.
Me too. Books can be such a great escape.
And not just an escape, but also a way to connect with other minds and gain new perspectives.
He specifically mentions rereading Graham Greene's The Power and the Glory during his breakdown.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Green himself struggled with depression.
Right. So maybe Haig found some comfort in reading a writer who understood what he was going through.
Like finding a kindred spirit.
Exactly. And then there's this other detail that really surprised me. He talks about finding comfort in Samuel Pepys's diaries.
Really?
Yeah. Specifically the entries about the plague and the Great Fire of London.
That's a curious choice.
I know. It seems counterintuitive to seek comfort in reading about such historical adversity.
Right. But maybe it was a way for him to gain some perspective.
Yeah, like a reminder that humanity has faced and overcome immense challenges throughout history.
And that he wasn't alone in his suffering.
Exactly. And speaking of perspective, he also talks about the role of knowledge in fighting depression.
Oh, yeah. He was really big on that.
Like he craved facts about depression as a way to regain a sense of control.
It was like he wanted to understand his enemy, you know?
Yeah, to demystify it and take away some of its power.
He wanted to know the science behind it, the biological and psychological underpinnings.
Which is important because there's still a lot of misinformation out there about depression.
Absolutely. He even challenges that oversimplified notion that depression is just a chemical imbalance.
Right, because it's so much more complex than that. It's a combination of genetic factors, environmental factors, life experiences.
And he's critical of the way depression is often portrayed in the media.
Oh yeah, because sometimes it can be really sensationalized or romanticized.
That can actually do more harm than good.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
can trivialize the real suffering that people are experiencing. And it can prevent people from seeking help.
He's a big advocate for having open and honest conversations about depression
Yeah, breaking down the stigma.
because he believes that talking about it can help reduce shame and encourage people to reach out for support.
Absolutely. It's so important to normalize these conversations.
Okay, so let's talk more about this idea of love saving him, as he puts it.
Yes, because he really credits Andrea's unwavering support for helping him through his darkest days.
He calls her his lifeline.
And it really highlights the crucial role that loved ones can play in supporting someone with mental illness.
He shares some really specific examples of how Andrea helped him, like going with him to doctor's appointments, encouraging him to read and write, taking care of the practical aspects of their lives when he felt overwhelmed.
Those are all really tangible acts of love and support.
Yeah, it's not just about saying, I'm here for you. It's about showing up in those practical ways that can make a real difference.
Exactly. Sometimes the most helpful thing you can do is just be there and offer practical support.
He even calls her his mind double and life sitter during his breakdown.
Wow, that's powerful imagery.
It really highlights how essential she was to his recovery.
And it also speaks to the incredible strength and resilience of those who support loved ones with mental illness.
Because their role is often invisible, but it's so demanding and requires so much patience and understanding.
Absolutely. It's a huge responsibility.
And he's honest about the fact that their relationship wasn't always easy. They had their challenges, they argued,
Right, because relationships are tested during tough times,
but they were able to communicate openly and work through those challenges together.
which is so important, being able to talk about the difficult stuff.
He even shares a story about a pretty brutal argument they had while living in Ibiza,
Oh, wow.
fueled by his drinking and her frustration.
That sounds intense.
It was, but ultimately they found their way back to each other, stronger than before.
And that's a beautiful testament to the power of love and forgiveness.
And resilience. Right, like relationships aren't about perfection. They're about weathering those storms together.
Exactly. And coming out on the other side, still connected.
Another important point that Haig makes is that it's okay to ask for help.
Oh, yes. So
It might feel difficult or embarrassing, but reaching out for support is essential.
It's a sign of strength, not weakness.
Exactly. He talks about how he initially resisted professional help, but eventually realized that it was a necessary step in his recovery.
And I think that's something a lot of people struggle with, that initial resistance to seeking help.
Yeah, there's still so much stigma around mental illness.
Right. And it can feel really vulnerable to admit that you need help.
But he really emphasizes that asking for help is a sign of self-awareness and courage.
It is. And it can make a world of difference.
He even offers some really practical advice for people who are supporting someone with depression or anxiety.
Oh, like what?
He says it's important to listen without judgment, to avoid those cliches like, just cheer up,
Yeah, those are never helpful.
to offer practical help, and to not give unsolicited advice.
Right, because sometimes people just need someone to listen and be there for them.
Exactly. He also points out that depression can manifest differently in men and women,
Oh, that's an important point.
and it's a topic that doesn't get talked about enough.
It doesn't, and it's really important to understand those differences.
He cites that alarming statistic that suicide is the leading cause of death for men under 35.
Wow, that's heartbreaking.
It is.
Yeah.
And it really underscores the need to address those societal pressures and expectations that often prevent men from expressing their emotions and seeking help. There's this idea that men need to be strong and stoic,
Right, and that they shouldn't show any weakness.
which can be really damaging.
It can, and he even challenges the notion that depression is more fatal for men, suggesting that it's not about the illness itself, but about societal expectations and access to support.
That's an interesting perspective.
It is, and it really highlights the need to create a culture where men feel safe and supported in expressing their emotions and seeking help.
Absolutely. Without feeling like they're any less of a man for doing so.
He also talks about how depression can distort our perceptions,
Oh, yeah.
causing us to see the world through this incredibly negative lens.
Right. It's like everything becomes bleak and hopeless.
And he mentions experiencing this envy towards people who seemed normal and happy.
Yeah, that's a common feeling, I think. When you're struggling with depression, you can feel really isolated and alone.
And you wonder why you can't just snap out of it and be like everyone else.
Exactly. But it's important to remember that everyone is fighting their own battles.
Even if we can't see them.
Right? What appears as normal and happy on the surface
Mhm.
might be masking internal struggles that we know nothing about.
That's such a good point. We never really know what's going on inside someone else's head.
We don't. So it's important to be kind and compassionate.
Always.
Yeah.
He also describes feeling like a structureless sculpture during his breakdown.
Oh, wow. That's a really vivid image.
I know. It really captures that sense of fragmentation and disorientation that depression can bring.
Like your sense of self just crumbles.
Yeah, and you're left feeling lost and untethered.
But despite all of this, Haig's story is ultimately one of hope and resilience.
It is.
Yeah.
And he describes experiencing this pivotal moment.
Oh, what happened?
Well, he calls it an inconsequential moment, but it was actually a huge turning point for him.
What was it?
It was this brief reprieve from his depression.
Oh, wow.
He describes it as a moment of nothingness, where he wasn't actively thinking about his depression or anxiety.
Like a moment of peace.
Exactly, like a glimmer of hope peeking through the darkness.
That's beautiful.
It was a sign that the sun was still there, even though it was obscured by clouds.
So even in the depths of despair, there can be those fleeting moments of lightness.
Yes, and those moments can be so powerful because they remind us that things can get better.
They give us hope.
He also talks about how travel became a way for him to challenge his limitations and gain a fresh perspective.
Oh, yeah. Travel can be so transformative.
It can. It pushes you outside of your comfort zone. exposes you to new experiences and ways of being.
And it can help you see the world and yourself with fresh eyes.
He specifically mentions a trip to Paris with Andrea,
Oh, nice.
which was a huge personal challenge for him, given his anxiety.
I can imagine.
He was terrified to go, but he knew he had to face his fear.
That's brave.
It was. And it wasn't just a vacation. It was a test of his resilience.
Right. A way to push back against those limitations that his anxiety had imposed.
He even talks about feeling awkward and out of place in Paris.
Oh, I can relate to that.
But then he realized that his Britishness could act as a convenient disguise for his social anxiety.
That's funny.
It is. It's kind of a humorous take on a serious issue.
Yeah, but it also points to how our perceptions of ourselves and others are often shaped by cultural norms and expectations.
That's true. He's also very honest about the fact that recovery wasn't a one-time event,
Right.
that he still experiences anxiety, especially in social situations.
Yeah, I think that's important to acknowledge.
It is,
Yeah.
because it's a reminder that mental health is an ongoing journey.
It's not about achieving some perfect state of happiness where you never feel anxious or down again.
It's about learning to manage those feelings and recognizing that setbacks are a normal part of the process.
Exactly.
Mm.
It's about developing resilience and coping mechanisms.
He actually describes having another panic attack at a literary party,
Oh, no.
surrounded by all these renowned authors.
That sounds like a nightmare.
It kind of was, but it's also a reminder that anxiety doesn't discriminate.
It can happen to anyone, anywhere.
Exactly, regardless of your achievements or social status.
So true. But he emphasizes that he's come a long way from those days when a panic attack would have sent him spiraling into a full-blown depressive episode.
Right.
He's learned to manage those moments better.
To ride the wave, as he puts it.
Yeah, and that's a huge accomplishment.
It is. He even talks about traveling alone to another literary party a year later,
Oh, wow.
and how that was a huge step for him,
It was, because it shows how much progress he had made.
even though he still felt uncomfortable at times.
Which is okay. It's about taking those small steps and pushing yourself just beyond your comfort zone.
Exactly. And celebrating those little victories.
Absolutely.
Oh.
He also reflects on how supporting Andrea through her mother's cancer diagnosis actually helped him develop a new sense of strength and resilience.
Oh, that's interesting.
Isn't it? It's like sometimes helping others can help us heal ourselves,
It can give us a sense of purpose and perspective.
and it can remind us of our own strength and resilience.
He talks about how that experience forced him to confront his own fear of separation anxiety and to step up as a supportive partner.
That's beautiful.
Mhm.
It's a great example of how challenging times can foster personal growth.
And deepen our connections with the people we love.
He also talks about finding purpose and joy in writing,
Oh, yeah.
both as a way to process his experiences and as a creative outlet.
He mentions how writing his first novel was a turning point for him.
Oh, what was it about?
It was a reworking of Shakespeare's Henry IV, but with talking dogs.
That's amazing. I love
It's
that.
pretty great. He acknowledges that he still has moments of anxiety and depression,
Right.
but he's learned to manage them in healthier ways.
Which is what recovery is all about.
It's not about achieving some perfect state of bliss.
It's about learning to live with those feelings and not letting them control your life.
He describes himself as having thin skin, but instead of viewing that as a weakness, he chooses to see it as a source of empathy and creativity.
That's a really powerful reframing.
It is. It's about embracing our perceived weaknesses and seeing them as strengths.
Because often they are.
He even says that he's thankful for his experiences with anxiety and depression.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they've shaped him into the person he is today.
That's a bold statement.
It is. But it speaks to the possibility of finding meaning and growth even in the darkest of experiences.
Which I think is a really hopeful message.
He also doesn't shy away from those big philosophical questions that often arise when contemplating mental illness.
Like what?
Well, he talks about feeling a sense of cosmic insignificance during his breakdown
Oh, yeah.
and questioning the meaning of life itself.
Those are big questions.
They are, and they're natural questions to ask when you're struggling with your mental health.
Because it can make you feel really lost and disconnected from everything.
He even delves into the philosophy of Arthur Schopenhauer,
Oh, wow.
who believed that happiness is an illusion and the only way to escape suffering is to renounce desire.
That's a pretty bleak outlook.
It is.
Mm.
And he doesn't necessarily advocate for that extreme approach. But he does acknowledge the wisdom in recognizing the pitfalls of endless wanting and striving.
It's about finding that balance
Yeah.
between pursuing our goals and finding contentment in the present moment.
Exactly. He also talks about the challenges of living in a modern world that's constantly bombarding us with stimuli and distractions.
Oh, yeah. Information overload?
He even compares our minds to computers constantly being updated and bombarded with information.
That's a great analogy.
Because it really feels like that sometimes, doesn't it?
It does. It's like our brains are always on overdrive.
And it can be exhausting.
It can lead to burnout and anxiety.
He suggests that we need to learn to be more discerning about the information we consume
Yeah.
and to create space for stillness and reflection.
To disconnect from the digital world and reconnect with ourselves.
He also talks about the importance of slowing down, being present, and appreciating the simple things in life.
Those are all really important practices.
They are, and they're so easy to forget in our fast-paced world.
They are. We're always rushing around trying to get things done.
He even mentions meditation as a tool for calming the mind and connecting with the present moment.
There's a lot of evidence to support the benefits of meditation for mental health.
It can help reduce stress, improve focus, and promote emotional regulation.
He also talks about how our perception of time can be warped by anxiety and depression,
Oh.
making time feel either incredibly slow or incredibly fast.
He describes feeling the weight of time during his breakdown,
Oh,
just watching the seconds tick by as he stood in front of a mirror.
That sounds really painful.
It was. He contrasts that experience with his childhood, when time seemed to fly by.
Yeah, childhood time is different,
It is filled with play and exploration.
and not so much responsibility.
Exactly. He even suggests that our modern obsession with achieving goals and accumulating possessions can make time feel shorter
Because we're always rushing towards the next thing.
without ever fully appreciating what we have right now
It's like we're always living in the future.
and missing out on the present.
He compares it to sipping a glass of wine slowly versus gulping it down.
Oh, I like that.
It's about savoring each moment.
Rather than rushing to the end.
He also talks about how his decision to stop drinking alcohol during his recovery forced him to confront his mental health in a more direct way.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because alcohol can be a way to numb out and avoid dealing with difficult emotions,
It's a coping mechanism.
but it's not a healthy one,
And by giving it up, he was forced to face his demons head on.
which ultimately led to a deeper understanding of himself.
So sometimes limitations can lead to unexpected growth.
I think that's a really important takeaway. Now, I'm really curious to hear more about Haig's insights into finding lasting happiness and resilience.
Yeah. What are some of the key takeaways he offers for people who are grappling with similar challenges?
So Haig really emphasizes the importance of becoming aware of our thoughts and feelings. He actually suggests that our minds aren't always our best friends.
Oh, that's interesting. What do you mean by that?
Well, he argues that we often get caught up in these negative thought patterns, like self-criticism and worry, and those can really fuel our anxiety and depression.
Yes.
It's like having this inner critic that's constantly putting us down.
Yeah, I totally get that. It's like that voice in your head that tells you you're not good enough.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Haig says we need to learn to recognize those negative thoughts and challenge them.
So it's about developing a more mindful awareness of what's going on inside our heads.
Yeah, and not just blindly accepting those negative thoughts as truth.
And this connects to something else he said that really struck me. He uses this phrase, the world is increasingly designed to depress us.
That's a powerful statement.
It is. It really makes you think.
Yeah, it does. He's basically arguing that our consumer-driven culture thrives on our anxieties and insecurities.
Right.
Like it's constantly pushing us to want more, achieve more, be more.
And that can be really overwhelming.
It can. And it can lead to this constant feeling of dissatisfaction, like we're never enough.
And it makes you wonder how much of our unhappiness is actually a result of our own internal struggles versus how much is a product of the society we live in.
That's a really good question. And I think Haig's point is that we need to be more aware of those external forces that might be contributing to our internal state.
Yeah, like those messages we're constantly bombarded with that tell us we need to buy more, do more, be more.
Exactly. And choosing not to buy into those messages can be a really powerful act of resistance.
It's like reclaiming your own happiness.
Exactly.
Abe also talks about the importance of finding joy in those simple things,
Oh, yeah.
like spending time in nature, connecting with loved ones, nurturing our creativity.
Those are all so important.
They are, but they're easy to forget when we're caught up in the busyness of everyday life.
It's true. We get so focused on achieving our goals and checking things off our to-do lists.
That we forget to actually enjoy the journey.
And Haig suggests that finding contentment in those simple things can almost be an act of rebellion in today's world.
I love that idea. Like it's about resisting that pressure to constantly strive and achieve.
Exactly. and choosing instead to appreciate the present moment.
And he also raises this really interesting point about our modern obsession with technology and instant gratification,
Yeah,
arguing that it can actually make us feel more disconnected and anxious.
it's true. We're more connected than ever through social media and our devices.
Right.
But so many people feel increasingly isolated and lonely.
It's like a paradox.
It is.
Yeah.
Like we're seeking connection in all the wrong places.
He compares modern life to a Jenga tower, with each moment stacked with tasks and distractions.
Oh, I like that analogy.
It really captures that feeling of being overwhelmed and fragmented.
Like you're constantly on edge waiting for the tower to collapse.
Exactly. But he's not totally anti-technology.
Right.
He suggests that we can reclaim our time and attention by setting boundaries, like disconnecting from our devices and prioritizing those things that truly matter.
So it's about making conscious choices.
Yes. And being more intentional about how we spend our time and energy.
He also talks about the need for self-compassion.
Oh, that's so important.
It is. Especially when we're struggling with mental health challenges.
Because we tend to be so hard on ourselves.
Yeah, we beat ourselves up for our mistakes and our perceived failings.
And Haig encourages us to treat ourselves with the same kindness and understanding that we would offer a loved one.
Yeah, to be more gentle and forgiving with ourselves.
It's like offering ourselves a hug instead of a slap on the wrist.
Exactly. We're all human. We're not perfect. And that's okay.
Haig also talks about how depression and anxiety might be in part a natural response to a world that's becoming increasingly complex and demanding.
That's an interesting perspective.
It is, like maybe our brains and bodies haven't quite caught up to the rapid pace of change.
And the constant bombardment of information.
He actually compares our brains to cavemen trying to navigate a world of skyscrapers and smartphones.
Oh, I love that.
It's funny, but it makes you think.
It does. Maybe our anxiety is a sign that we're not really meant to live this way.
Always on, always connected, always striving.
Right. Like maybe we need to slow down and simplify.
He also talks about how depression can warp our sense of time,
Yeah.
making it feel like we're living in dog years, where each day feels like an eternity.
It's like time is moving at a different speed.
And everything feels heavy and slow.
But he also reminds us that down isn't the only direction.
That's a powerful message of hope.
It is. It's a reminder that things can and do get better.
Even when it feels impossible.
And he doesn't just say that things will get better. He gives examples from his own life and the lives of others.
It's like he's saying, look, I've been there. Others have been there. You're not alone.
And there is hope.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into reasons to stay alive, I'm struck by Haig's honesty, his vulnerability, and ultimately his hopefulness.
It's a really inspiring book.
It is, and I think it's a must-read for anyone who's ever struggled with depression and anxiety, or anyone who wants to better understand those experiences.
He does a great job of capturing what it's really like to live with those conditions.
And he offers a lot of practical advice and insights on how to cope and find healing. And hope. He leaves us with this really thought-provoking question. What aspects of your own life contribute to or detract from your mental well-being?
That's a good one.
It is. It's an invitation to reflect on our own lives, our choices, and our habits.
And to consider how we might create a life that better supports our mental health.
Exactly. And ultimately, I think his message is one of resilience, self-compassion, and the enduring power of hope.
Yeah. And a reminder that we're not alone in this journey.
Seeking support and practicing self-care are acts of strength, and there is always a reason to stay alive.
We hope you found this deep dive helpful. And if you're struggling, please know that there are resources available to support you.
You can find more information in the show notes. And as always, thanks for listening.